Good evening, you're watching NDTV 24/7. I'm Rishika Barwa. We're beginning this show with some breaking news that is coming in. Disturbing pictures that we're bringing to you of the moment, the precise moment when the ex-Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot. I'd like to once again tell our viewers, your discretion is advised, as the pictures we're about to put out on our screen are indeed disturbing, but it captures that very moment this morning when Shinzo Abe was shot. Take a look. Those are disturbing pictures that have just come in of the moment the former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was assassinated today. He was shot at twice, and from those pictures what it looks like is that it was a second gunshot that actually hit him, because you can see him falling to the ground just moments later. What you can also see in those very dramatic pictures that are just coming in is the fact that the security agencies are then seen rushing towards the alleged assassin. He was, of course, just hanging around at that rally. Remember, this was a campaign event in the Nara region, a very small gathering on the eve of Sunday's upper house elections in Japan. Shinzo Abe was Japan's youngest and longest serving prime minister. The killer has been identified as a 41-year-old former member of the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force who was reportedly dissatisfied with him and wanted to kill him. Now, the Prime Minister of Japan, Fumio Kishida, has condemned the shooting in the strongest terms. The people in Japan and the people all over the world really are in an absolute state of shock at this assassination. Japan, remember, is a country where political violence is rare. Japan, in fact, has some of the world's toughest gun control laws. The annual deaths from firearms in Japan, a country of over 125 million people, are in single figures, believe it or not. Getting a gun license is a very long and complicated process, even for Japanese citizens. For India, this has been a huge loss, and we're going to discuss that in just a short while from now. But I'm told that I'm being joined live by Chinmay Dikshit, an NHK World Japan reporter. He's joining us live from Tokyo. Chinmay Dikshit, thanks very much. You work for the Hindi service of NHK World Japan, and we're just showing to our viewers those very disturbing pictures of that precise moment when Shinzo Abe was shot this morning. And as you can see, there's barely any security around him. 2 gunshots are fired, and then you can see the security forces, rushing to overpower the shooter.
Yes, absolutely right, Sonia. This is the case that happened today. Horrific incident, no doubt about it. And as far as security is concerned, actually that has been the norm in Japan, that people of any strata, they travel with public, they belong to public, and once they leave their post, they don't hold any position of power or something like that, and they mingle completely with public at all strata. And if you have seen, then you must have known that the wife of Mr. Abe, she actually, when she heard the news that her husband is shot, she traveled to Nara through train. It was not airlifted. She was not given any privileges. She traveled just like an ordinary passenger, ordinary person of this great country.
Right. Very interesting what you're saying, Chinmay. And, what we've been hearing through the course of the day as well is that there are no huge political rallies in Japan. There are these intimate gatherings. People have a lot of access to be able to go up and talk to leaders who are campaigning. And all of this, of course, happening on the eve of the election. What we're also learning at the moment is that the election is still going to go on. as per the schedule. So there are going to be upper house elections that are going to be held on Sunday in Japan, despite the assassination today. But as far as India is concerned, now this has been a huge loss. Now remember, Shinzo Abe was a true friend of India. He was credited with transforming ties between New Delhi and Tokyo. He was one of the first leaders to actually look at India as a major Asian democratic power and a force to reckon with. His warm relationship with Prime Minister Narendra Modi dates back to the days when Narendra Modi was Chief Minister of Gujarat. The Prime Minister has announced a day of national mourning tomorrow as a mark of respect for Shinzo Abe. What does this loss really mean for India, for Japan, and really for the rest of the world? Dr. Tara Kartha, Strategic Affairs expert and former director of the National Security Council Secretariat, is joining us. We also have Aftab Seth, former Indian diplomat to Japan. He's been a former ambassador. Brahma Chelani, Strategic Affairs expert, is also with us on the broadcast. And we have Dr. Jagannath Panda, the head of Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs, as well as Mr. K.C. Singh, former Secretary, Ministry of External Affairs. Thank you all very much for being with us. Aftab Seth, I want to begin by asking you, we've been talking so much through the course of the day about how Shinzo Abe is, he was the architect of the Quad and is largely to be credited for India being looked at as a force to reckon with. But all of this really began from a time when his relationship started with Prime Minister Narendra Modi, when he was actually the Chief Minister of Gujarat.
Well, Shinzo Abe's visit to India in August 2006, when he was Prime Minister, was really a very crucial visit as far as the India-Japan story is concerned, because he was invited by Prime Minister Mourns to address the Indian Parliament. That's the first time that the Japanese Prime Minister addressed the Parliament, and he made that significant speech about the confluence of the two seas. That is where he unrolled his vision for a cooperation between the Indian Ocean and the Pacific Ocean and the countries that lie in between. And that's where India figured very strongly. So this continued over the years, and later that year, in fact, in 2006, Manmohan Singh went to Japan and upgraded the global partnership between India and Japan announced by Prime Minister Modi and Prime Minister Vajpayee in August 2000. Manmohan Singh and Abe upgraded it to a strategic and global partnership. This was significant because then the beginnings of naval cooperation and Coast Guard cooperation that started in Modi's time in 2000 took on a new dimension. And we had naval exercises between not only India and Japan, but Abe brought in the United States and in April 2007. And by September 2007, we had Australia and Singapore. That was the germ of what you see today, the Quad. It goes back to 2007. And Abe took that further when he came back with a very major victory in the 2012 election. He took it further. And he also made a strong focus on the ASEAN region.
Right.
In the very first year of his prime ministership, he made sure that he went to every single one of the ASEAN countries. He was an indefatigable traveler.
Right.
And he made sure that Japan, ASEAN, Australia, India, and of course, the long-standing Japan-US security relationship, that these would be meshed into what you today see as the Quad. Right. So he was a visionary, a man with a great strategic thinking, unlike many other Japanese prime ministers.
But speaking of that strategic thinking, speaking of that, K.C. Singh, if I can bring you into the conversation, as far as India is concerned, we also look at Shinzo Abe's assassination as India losing not just a true friend, but also an ally against China.
No, that's true. But you must remember, let's not personalize it over too much. He's sown the seeds. The plants have grown. And as Ambassador Aftab Seth explained it, it began with Vajpayee, grew then with Manmohan Singh. So this is a process in continuum. But his contribution is that Abe foresaw China as a threat to the region, the rise of China. And secondly, he was taking Japan past the diffidence which they had after the Second World War, where they were seen as oppressors all through East Asia. So his going and reaching out to the ASEAN was a way of a new Japan, which was willing to go and talk to them from a position of strength and not from a position of guilt. And therefore, that is what he started crafting from self-defense forces which can go and fight abroad. And he did this in 2006, 2007. 2007, I was additional secretary when the first meeting of the Quad took place. And it was a germ. It was basically an idea that began with him. Dr. Manmohan Singh was not over keen to take on the Chinese, nor was President Bush. Because at that point, the Americans felt that she could be engaged and he could be used as a positive factor in a new order in Asia.
Right.
Whereas I think Abe realized that China was a looming problem and therefore you needed the Quad. And I remember when before the meeting took place at the additional secretary level, the Chinese went berserk. They made demarches in Washington, in Tokyo, in Canberra, saying you cannot have this kind of a grouping, which is exclusive, which has democracy as a basis. But they stuck to it. Unfortunately, what happened is he had SPAR in 2007. And in Australia, the Liberal Party loses and Kevin Rudd of Labour Party comes in. And the Indians and the Americans were anyway reluctant to be on. So Quad was put to sleep till Abe comes back in 2012.
Yes.
And then, of course, has gone on from there to summitry. So his contribution is there. But at the same time, it's not the sole peg on which the Indo-Japanese relationships hang. He's done his work. But I think the path that he's hewn, that will remain very much for whoever is the Prime Minister to follow.
Dr. Tara, if I can bring you into the conversation, because like I said, at the very outset, this has been extremely shocking. And those latest pictures, like, that we're putting out, I mean, extremely disturbing pictures to see what has happened. This kind of political violence is very rare in a country like Japan. Gun violence is very rare in a country like Japan. Do you see this really changing the dynamics of politics within Japan, even Southeast Asia for that matter?
Not really, though I would assume what would change is what your person in Tokyo had said about the wife traveling by train to go and see her husband. That's going to change soon. I mean, they're going to have a new set of security regulations coming in. I mean, I remember when I was in Japan seeing, like you said, you would see most of the leaders on the road. There is no, tamasha about these people going around. But having said that, I would also, what strikes me about Abe is that he's so focused on what he wanted. This was way back when he started talking of a security diamond, and that was, I think, years ago when he first wrote, 2012, when he wrote this article. 2007 he had the Quad, and from 8 years he got what he wanted. He came to India. He had the 2007 speech here, then he goes out of office. Prime Minister Modi goes to Japan, fistful of agreements, the first military cooperation in exchange of military information. Long before we had something with the US, we have with Japan. 1 week later, he goes to Australia and then brings in Australia into this leg. So there's he is very, very clear. He was very, very clear on what he wants. So the Quad, like Ambassador Singh said, was virtually literally pushed back by Abe and brought into what it was today. And then, of course, he followed it up with the rest of it, getting the defense budget as recently as, I think it was May, when he said the Japanese defense budget should go beyond 2%. So he is, and his influence, though I would disagree with your correspondent, his influence was still huge. I mean, this is a man from a massive political family. His grandfather was in politics, his father was in politics. So he was very clear about the direction which Japan should go. Right. The national security policy and all the rest of it.
Well, the youngest and the longest serving Prime Minister in Japan. Brahma Chelani, the other really disturbing aspect of this story today that we've reported on is how the Chinese social media has erupted in celebration over the assassination of Shinzo Abe. How do you look at that?
Well, that's very unfortunate. The fact is that Shinzo Abe was Japan's most influential post-war leader who helped shape strategic discourse far from the country's shores. For example, if you look at America's free and open Indo-Pacific policy, that concept of free and open Indo-Pacific was authored by Shinzo Abe. Rarely before has the US adopted a foreign designed concept as the linchpin of its foreign policy. And his assassin has ensured that Abe's legacy will live on forever. The fact is that the ideas of a consequential leader generally outlive that leader. And when history is written, Abe will be seen as one of Japan's most consequential leaders in the post-war era. As far as the India-Japan relations are concerned, the momentum in those ties will not be lost because those ties have been developing over the last 15, 20 years.
Right.
And that there's a certain momentum in those ties. Abe was instrumental in turning those ties into Asia's fastest growing relationship. And he also helped add strategic content to the India-Japan relationship. So his legacy will live on. And as far as Chinese nationalists celebrating Abe's assassination, that really underscores China's concerns and fears. The fact that Abe was instrumental in creating this coalition, the Quad. He was instrumental in creating the Indo-Pacific policy, the strategy of the United States, which Joe Biden has maintained, even though this is a Trump legacy and Biden has been overturning Trump policies. But on the Indo-Pacific strategy, that same Trump policy continues under Biden.
Right.
So Abe was very influential in shaping this course far from Japan.
Dr. Jagannath Panda, the other really shocking aspect of this story, of course, has been, all of it is extremely shocking. But, all of this is also happening on the eve of the upper house election in Japan. And, one of the local reporters, in fact, this morning in that first press conference that Prime Minister Kishida addressed actually asked if he fathoms this is a threat to democracy in Japan.
Yes, absolutely. In fact, he was the face of LDP. LDP is in power for such a long time, and the credit goes to Abe Shinzo. In fact, I remember, a few years back, he made a public statement in Japan by saying that I should not be addressed as Shinzo Abe. I should rather be addressed as Abe Shinzo. And he made this statement primarily to symbolize that, it is important in Japanese tradition, we need to put our family name first, the world should not be hijacked by the Chinese tradition, where the family name is put as the first name. So he appealed to the LDP members, he appealed to the Japanese domestic politician to give Japan the due recognition that the Japanese tradition needs. And that kind of leader he was. So he revised a number of issues. In fact, he was the leader who actually brought the security aspects in Japanese foreign policy to the forefront. No political leader so far has outspoken so much about Article 9. And I think Abe Shinzo was the leader who actually talked about revising the post-war constitution. And that's why he faced a lot of opposition. But still, he was the most consequential leader in Japanese political history in the post-war period. And most importantly, he revived the Indo-Pacific concept. In fact, if you see, he is one of those leaders in India and in many world forums who have been invited to national legislatures. And rightfully, I think he addressed the joint houses in Indian Parliament.
Yes.
We don't have many leaders like that. So I think he brought a personal aura with him, which both the Japanese domestic political constituency and international Indo-Pacific constituency will miss him.
Right. It's very interesting that you say that because, Chinmay Dikshit, as somebody who you are in Tokyo and you're of course looking at Japanese politics very closely as well. What does this really mean for the party? What does this mean for the LDP party? I mean, he was out on an election campaign. There are upper house elections on Sunday. What does this mean for the future of the party, given the fact that he was the face, the star campaigner, as you'd like to put it?
Yeah, he was the star campaigner for the party. But the moment he resigned from the post, there was a reshuffle that happened back in 2021. And then the party has seen 2 prime ministers after Mr. Shinzo Abe. So there is no doubt that he was one of the star campaigners of the party. He was the biggest name of the party. He was not ousted from the government. He resigned because he had certain health issues that he wanted to cater upon. So that's why he couldn't find himself be able enough to discharge his duties as a prime minister. That's why he resigned. So his stature as a politician was undoubtedly right. There was no question about it. But Abe Shinzo, even after becoming the star campaigner of his party, he was considered as just one among the equals. So as I have already told you earlier, that there were no special treatments here.
Yes.
In Japan, people also did not. I was roaming around the streets of Tokyo all day around, and I couldn't find people mourning the death of or the assassination attempt on their former prime minister. So I felt, it's my personal opinion, that probably people do not feel connected so much with a former prime minister, because he comes from a royalty, or maybe because they do not think that the government, that the government is doing the LDP, the policies of the Liberal Democratic Party.
I think one of the other things that you said was very interesting, and Aftab said, if you'd sort of like to respond to that when his wife heard about the assassination attempt, and at that point he was airlifted and taken to hospital, and he of course battled for his life there. She actually took a train and came to Nara. So that's the nature of how accessible leaders have been, or how easy this movement is. Because even if you see those pictures, I mean, there isn't too much security, no elaborate arrangements, no stage, not too much distance created between him and those who were attending that campaign.
See, the thing is, actually it happens. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Please go ahead.
Mr. Seth.
So, is it for me? Yes. That is absolutely correct. There is a very limited security at public meetings of this kind. And particularly in Nara, which is it's kind of sleepy. It's an old imperial capital of Japan, of very beautiful temples, the Todaiji and the Yakushi-ji, and some of the most beautiful temples in Japan. So perhaps people were more relaxed that they were in a place like Nara.
Right.
But it is correct, there isn't any overt security usually. So a sitting prime minister would have all these plainclothesmen all around him, looking rather, glaring at people who attempt to approach the prime minister. But just a single thing about Abe's vision and his desire to make Japan a more assertive country, actually from his faction, factions in the Japanese political system are important. Prime Minister Modi, followed by Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi, and followed by Abe, all belong to the same faction of the LDP.
Right.
And Modi started the business of bringing India into the Japanese conversation, started the security relationship. Koizumi was not so enthusiastic, but he did come here in April 2005. And as far as Japan's defense forces are concerned, he's the one who wanted Japan to be a normal country.
Right.
Article 9 was Koizumi's idea, the senior of Abe and the mentor of Abe.
Right.
It was his idea that we should have Japan as a more normal country, that Japan's defense forces should be more assertive.
Right.
He actually allowed a nuclear-powered American naval ship to dock in a Japanese port, the first time that had ever happened. Of course, the machines, the engines were turned off. But he made these gestures to demonstrate to the Japanese people that it was time that they had to rethink about the overt pacifism that had informed their foreign policy and their domestic policy since 1952, when the American occupation ended. So Abe comes from that stream of the LDP, and of course, because of his very long innings, his 9 years at one stretch, and because of his own vision, he brought this whole thing forward. But he's very a part of a continuum.
Right. Well, I'm completely out of time on the broadcast, but thank you all very much for joining us. And, you know, like you all have all been saying, that India has, of course, lost an ally, lost a true friend. But at the same time, under the leadership of Shinzo Abe, you know, India and Japan's ties have been cemented and hopefully will only grow stronger from here. That's all the time we have. We're slipping into a short break. Stay tuned to NDTV for more.